Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning into this special segment of the Greater Farmington Film Festival. I'm your host, Jonathan Braue, and with me, I have the privilege of speaking with filmmaker Jeff Bemiss. You know what? I should have asked you, how do you pronounce your last name?
Bemis.
Bemiss. All right, I'll start it over here real quick. All right. Uh, Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning into this special segment of the Greater Farmington Film Festival. I'm your host, Jonathan Braue, and with me, I have the privilege of speaking with filmmaker Jeff Bemiss, whose documentary Missing in Brooks County is screening at our festival this week. Jeff, great to be here with you tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess before we begin tonight, I just want to point out a couple of things that about Jeff. He's an award-winning, Oscar shortlisted writer-director, has worked in shorts, features, and documentaries. His work has aired on network television and PBS. He is a graduate of the University of Southern California Film School and the LA Sanford Meisner Academy. Bemiss is a Connecticut Artist Fellow and a Film Independent Fast Track Fellow. He freelances for disability and social activist clients and teaches film at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. So Jeff, I mean, quite a list of accomplishments here. We're here to talk about your documentary, Missing in Brooks County. For those that might be tuning in that haven't watched it yet and might be watching us before they do so, can you explain a little bit what your documentary is all about?
So, Missing in Brooks County is the story of two families who come to Brooks County, Texas, in search of their loved ones who went missing there, as hundreds of do, sadly, every year after crossing the Rio Grande into the United States. And so we follow those families. And what makes Brooks County unusual is that it has an interior immigration checkpoint, and it's actually the busiest interior immigration checkpoint in the nation, and it's essentially turned the county into a killing field.
Mm. Why is it the busiest checkpoint in Texas? What has caused that?
Well, I guess it's just strategically where it's located. I mean, it's, if you want to come through South Texas, you could come through West Texas, I think, and there's another road. But through this part of Texas, if you want to get to points, Houston and beyond, points north, you really only have a couple of highways. And so, checkpoint is a military tactic, and they've chosen a choke point on that northbound highway. There's also one in Sarita, roughly in that area. But this is the one that I think most migrants, migrate through, and so that's why it's become the busiest checkpoint.
You mentioned and used the word killing fields, which implies that it's intentional. Why is this intentional? Why do you feel like this might be an intentional act as immigrants trying to cross are put into really harsh conditions in immigrating over to the country?
Kate Spradley, the forensic scientist in the film, kind of discusses this a little bit in one of her talks. So in 1994, the Clinton administration started something called prevention through deterrence, where essentially what they did is they shut down the safer, more populated areas where people would migrate through, and they deliberately pushed people into these inhospitable, dangerous desert areas in Texas, Arizona, California, New Mexico. And they knew that there would be a death toll created by that, and they felt that would deter people. But it didn't. We have more people dying today than we did then. I mean, the deaths have really just increased over time. There have even so it is a policy, and there have even been some leaked documents that show this is, perversely, the number of deaths is actually used as a metric of success for this tactic by the Border Patrol. I mean, it's designed to send a message of deterrence across the southern border.
So many, when you say that and mention it, you can't help, if you're a humanitarian of any sort, get very upset. Why is, started by the Clinton administration, which I think might surprise some people, why has this continued for nearly 30 years now? Why does this continue to be a tactic?
Well, that's a good question, and I'm not sure that I have a good answer for it,
Sure.
except that there is a whole history to, sort of how immigration became illegal, or, becoming, basically migrating through without papers became criminalized. Um, and I think, though, what has happened since prevention through deterrence is this enforcement only mentality and this hyper militarization. It's actually created a border security industrial complex now that has become an obstacle to reform. And I think most people would agree the system does need reforming.
Hmm.
People don't always agree on how to reform it, but I do think that there are some obstacles in it's an economic obstacle now as much as anything else.
As the co-director and one of the producers of this film, I have to imagine that you came across it at some point, discovered it, decided like I need to help tell this story. Being from Indiana, moving to Connecticut, being more north of where this story is taking place, how did you come across it, and why were you compelled to tell this story?
So my co-director Lisa Malamat and I, we met in at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, actually. But I think what got us making this film together was actually an episode of StoryCorps.
Hmm.
The mini NPR documentary
Yeah,
series.
love those. Yeah.
They did a story on a forensic scientist at Baylor University in Waco, Texas, Lori Baker, who was doing exhumations in South Texas. And Lisa and I were just really moved by the story. And Lisa's lived in Mexico. She's now living and teaching in Tucson. I have a sister-in-law from Mexico, but we just found the story really moving, and we reached out to Lori, who invited us out to Texas. So we went out, and she took us down to this place called Falfurrias, Texas, in Brooks County. And we asked her at one point, okay, so show us the border. Where's the border? She said, "Oh, no, no, that's 70 miles. That's 80 miles. We're nowhere near the border. Brooks isn't even a border county, but this is where the problem is." And I
Mm.
think it was that moment where Lisa and I realized that this wasn't going to be, at the time, we thought a short documentary set at Baylor University. And it ended up becoming a 4-year endeavor to document what was happening in Brooks County.
4 years. That's quite a commitment. But I can imagine extremely necessary to kind of show the journey of the families looking for their loved ones. And in that regard, how did you find these families? And I hate to put it this way, but was there a casting process, a vetting process, or was it kind of just the first folks that came in looking, for their brother or their son, that you just kind of picked up and started following them and continue to follow them? How did that work exactly?
We did actually film with some families that did not end up in the finished film, and one of them at one point just said, I think this isn't for us after all. And so the two families that are featured in the film are the family of Juan Maceda, and we met his cousin Moises, who's in the film, while we were filming with Eddie Canales,
Mm,
who runs the South Texas Human Rights Center, for those who've seen the
mm,
film. And so that's how we met him. And then the Roman family, Michelle Chinos and Omar Roman, who are the brother and sister-in-law of the missing person, Homero Roman, in the film. Uh, well, early in our filming, we had put up just a rudimentary website with what we thought at the time was a temporary title, Missing in Brooks County. And at that time, Michelle and Omar were searching for information about
mm.
their missing brother, um, using those search terms, missing Brooks County. And our little website popped up. And so that's how we connected. We connected on the phone, actually. And then we just so happened we were going to Texas a few days later to film. And so we sat down for coffee, and Lisa and I sort of pitched to them participating in the film. And they went off and had a family meeting, and they came back and very courageously said yes. They said that
Mm.
we want Omero's story to be a part of the film.
how do you get a family like that who's, not trained to talk or converse or get as vulnerable as they do in the documentary, get so vulnerable and just, speak it as if, you were a friend. I mean, it's got to come from a ton of relationship building, but I mean, it's got to take time too. How do you get people comfortable in this process to be themselves so that people viewing it aren't, skeptical of kind of maybe them putting on their own show, or maybe, because that comes up in the documentary from the task force that's trying to push these immigrants back, right? That's one of the perspectives you show. So curious to know, like, how do you get people to divulge as much as you do, and including, right, Eddie and that task force, because it's very compelling, narrative that they kind of bring about within the doc.
Well, you're right. There was a lot of trust building that needed to take place. And I mean, I think we sort of hit it off with the Roman family. I mean, they're just, I have so much respect for them. They're so authentic. They're so genuine. I mean, that's just who they are. Um, and so that trust building happened, I think, fairly quickly and fairly naturally. Um, I I guess I could say we got lucky by meeting them, basically, in terms of the story that's told in the film. Regarding the others, well, the Texas Border Volunteers, who are the sort of vigilante group run by the veterinarian Dr. Mike Vickers, they were open to the media, but they were sort of a little bit skeptical at the same time. Like, so he would Mike Vickers would meet us out for an interview. He'd meet us maybe at his place of work or somewhere out in public, and it took 3 years of kind of bugging him to get invited on one of their operations, their nighttime ops.
Wow.
And I think it took almost as long to get invited to his house. So that was a process of building trust. Um, and then in terms of Eddie and Kate, the volunteers in the film, they were much more approachable because they have a constant stream of journalists coming and going. So they're really used to talking to the media. I think what was different with Lisa and I from the journalists they usually talk to, is, we just didn't go away. We just kept showing up, and we would stay, and they saw we were shooting a crazy amount of film. I'm not sure they ever totally understood what we were doing,
Hmm.
but they saw we were working really hard. And I think that's what built the trust is, the more time we spent shooting together, the more it felt like we were sort of, I guess, telling the same story, telling it together.
And has Vickers seen the film since its
No,
release?
not to my knowledge, he has not. We're going to do it. Lisa and I and Jacob Bricka, who is one of the producers and was our editor. We're all going to go to Texas in August and do a. We're going to have the film's going to actually have a limited theatrical release,
Oh, that's
and
great.
we're going to go to Brooks County. We're going to show it, and so that'll be the time when he sees it, and when I think also the Border Patrol sees it too. So that'll be interesting.
What do you anticipate that reaction being? As close as you are to him, do you think he's gonna feel slighted, or do you think he's like, no, that's how I feel. So thank you for documenting me appropriately.
Yeah, I think the latter. I
Yeah.
think that he'll probably say, um, "Yeah, that's my point of view. I'm glad it's out there now. Everybody can see it." Because that's what it is to have your own worldview.
Yeah.
He looks at it and probably sees something totally different. So I don't anticipate he's going to have a problem with it.
Wow. It's unfortunate because you would hope that he would open his mind, because that's really, I mean, that is the target audience, if we're talking marketing terms, that you want to get this perspective in front of, to go, yeah, you know what, these aren't the labels that we like to throw around, right? Illegals, illegal immigrants. These are people that aren't coming over here to take advantage of the country per se. They're coming over because they're trying to escape to a better life, to a new start. And I thought you did a really great job at highlighting, I'm forgetting the cousin that went back, and then tried to cross again because he got deported from the family. I thought you did a
Yeah.
tremendous job at highlighting that. But and I feel like that sort of case study needs to be understood. Like, it's not the same, and people want to make a living here. That's the whole point of America. I don't know if you want to expound upon that point that you're making in the film, but I thought it was pretty powerful.
Yeah, I mean, right. Well, with the case of Homero, he was your kind of textbook DACA sort of case, though he wasn't under DACA, but he was brought by his parents to the U.S. when he was about 5. So he was sent back to a country that he really didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the thing that people maybe don't realize quite, is that when people go missing, um, the grieving families, their loved ones who are left wondering what happened to them, they're not all in faraway places. They're not all in Central America or even in Mexico. A lot of them are our neighbors. They're right here, and they're deeply rooted in the United States. I mean, many people who come are coming to join family
Yeah.
who are here.
What, for those that might have a strong viewpoint on you know making immigration harder or more difficult, what do you hope they garner from this, in seeing the some of the the graphic visuals of how young boys again are just trying to reconnect with their families, but end up going through hellish experiences just for the opportunity to be here. What do you hope that they take away from your documentary?
I think that to state it simply, I think if the film makes any case, it's that any immigration policy that results in over 1,000 people a year dying along the entire southwest border really needs to be examined. Um, I mean, Lisa and I, in making this film, we didn't want to make an overtly political film, and I don't think it is. I mean, I think it's a humanitarian film, but
Absolutely.
it really paints a 360-degree view of what's happening in Brooks County. We wanted to treat the audience as intelligent and capable of making up their own minds, drawing their own conclusions about what country they want to have and what policies they want to have. But we did feel that in order to do that, they needed to witness. They needed to see what's happening, because a lot of people don't know that people are dying, and certainly not in these numbers, because it's not a Kate Spradley in the film. It's not. This isn't in the film, but she says this a lot. If this was something dramatic like a genocide or a war zone, or there were jumbo jets crashing in Texas every year, there would be a lot of attention and money would flow toward the
That's
problem. But
a great point.
this is different. Migration is quiet, and people walk into the desert and they vanish, and it's sort of invisible. And so it's hard to create the political will to address this, and that's one of the challenges.
Yeah. What as far as policy goes, I mean, where do you start? Because one of the things you outlined very early in the documentary is the fact that Brooks County is broke. They have one deputy to forget what it was, 9,000 acres roughly. I mean, it's just insurmountable odds, and honestly impossible to fix the situation. And then you have Eddie and his organization that's trying to put water, and then people taking away that water. What needs to happen in your mind to start to progress this so people aren't dying simply trying to enter the country?
Well, I mean, it's really complex, and I think that I can tell you. I don't know that I have an answer, but I can tell you what some of the people in the film think. I mean, Eddie is kind of like, well, why are we militarizing the border to begin with? People,
Mhm.
they come to work. This myth that they're criminals, it's not true. They
Right.
come to work, and the labor is needed. So Eddie says, let people come and let them work, and open up safer places where they can travel through. And then we can also keep tabs on who's coming and going, as opposed to pushing people into these areas where it's not only dangerous, but you have no idea who's coming and going, and you're really not keeping track. Um, Sheriff Martinez, Benny Martinez of Brooks County, who, by the way, one of Lisa and my, and I think Jacob too, our big regrets is that he didn't really make it into the film. This happens in documentary films
Mhm.
sometimes. You can't get
Mhm.
everything in. but he really made the film possible in many ways. We filmed a lot with him. But he says, the sheriff of Brooks County, something similar to Eddie. I mean, he says, let people, I remember he told me, he said, just let people in and just keep track everybody. Keep the lines of communication open. We have the technology, we have the systems, we could do it if we just had the political will. So that's what, I mean, there's a couple of perspectives on that. But I mean, one thing that could be done to keep people from dying unnecessarily would be probably to get rid of these interior checkpoints. And let me just say one last thought on this question. For those who, just to be totally clear, these checkpoints are nowhere near the border. They are interior checkpoints. And I think a lot of Americans, including me before making this film, don't even know that we have such a thing as interior checkpoints, even though there's over 100 of them across the United States, and 2/3 of the U.S. population live in a checkpoint zone, including my entire home state of Connecticut, because coastal borders are a part of that, of that zone. So they're basically a result of a relatively obscure 1970 Supreme Court decision that has had all kinds of unintended consequences, including causing a lot of deaths, as you see in the film, and yet it's never been re-examined.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. I didn't realize that, and if it's mentioned in there, I missed it. But that's insane that there's 100, including in.
Well, now they're not all fixed. Some
Sure.
of them are what they call tactical, so they're mobile. They move around. Okay. They put them up, they take them down, they move them. And so there's a much smaller number of fixed checkpoints, but yes, there's quite a few. Wow. The exact number is not, I don't think they publish it.
And are all of them, I mean, there's various things, but the thing about Brooks County is that 40 miles to walk around the checkpoint is pretty treacherous as far as heat, the lack of water, the lack of, just being able to survive the elements in this 40-mile hike. It's how do you, and you're doing it with the documentary, but ultimately, if you could put a spotlight on the county itself, what would you immediately want to happen? Would it be for some sort of shelter, I mean, what can be done, tomorrow, in a sense, to prevent the deaths happening? Because I think at one point in the documentary, I heard that, hey, this is the third one this week. That's tragic.
Yeah, and sadly, this summer the numbers are terrible. In fact, they may actually have a record number of migrant deaths in Brooks County this year. So yeah, I mean, aside from tearing down the checkpoint, the interior checkpoint, I mean, on a local level, I'm not really sure what you can do beyond what Eddie is doing. I mean, just to be a little more positive, there was just a bill that was passed, the Missing Persons and Unidentified Remains Act, that was signed, I think, on December 31st by Donald Trump, believe it or not, which is the first time that the federal government has put some money toward some of the work that Kate Spradley is doing, exhuming and identifying anonymously buried migrants, as well as putting some of these rescue beacons out that somebody who's in distress can, hit a button and their location will then be transmitted and they can, ideally then there'll be a rescue response. So there was, everybody's told us, this is not a silver bullet, it's a very small step. It's not even funded yet, but it did pass, and it's a major, it's a major step because it's the first time the federal government has sort of acknowledged some responsibility for what's happening along the southwest border. These deaths.
I mean, that's a start, right? That's the start of it. That's awesome. And continue on the positive note, there was such a response, right? Because you start the whole documentary kind of through Eddie's eyes and him kind of going along these ranch fences and looking for people and setting up water stations. But pretty quickly you get into some, you see the death, you experience it, and the whole beginning feels, and I believe that, it was intentional, kind of like we're lost. We don't even fully understand exactly what's happening, but we discover it naturally. Tell me a little bit about the narrative arc that you build with your editor, and the choices that you made to kind of, because I found myself for the first 10 minutes trying to just get a grasp of like what's going on, and then once you realize it and you're starting from Eddie's perspective, then you're like, oh my goodness, I this is for real, and then it just kind of seems to progressively get more expansive, more dire. So talk to me a little bit about why you chose to set up the arc in the manner that you did.
Yeah, from a filmmaking point of view, this was a bit of a challenge because we did have multiple narratives, and every film when it's finished, I think feels a little bit inevitable. But I can assure you that it was not clear how all these stories were going to go together in one film. And we were very lucky to have a terrific editor, Jacob Bricka, very, very accomplished, very experienced, and he brought fresh eyes to the material because Lisa and I had been off filming, and so the three of us banged our heads for quite a while to work to put these stories together. Um, we felt that we had a lot of conversations about how graphic the film could be and still be responsible. And it's really at the beginning. I mean, there's not really that much that's graphic after that the scene I think that you're referencing. And we did that because we wanted to establish the stakes up front. We wanted the audience to understand what this was about, what's at risk here, what's at stake. And, I think sometimes we wanted to be respectful, but I think sometimes, if you're too respectful, it just means that you're basically silent about it and you don't deal with it. And we didn't want to do that either. So we tried to strike a balance, and I think that scene really works, and it's very shocking because as you said, I mean, you're a filmmaker, so you totally get this. We're in Eddie's point of view. That really happened. I mean, he goes out to fill his water jugs, and that's what happens. And it's you're seeing it the way he sees it.
Yeah. There's no reshooting. I mean, you're getting that all in the moment, right, as it's happening. I mean, you don't in real life, you don't stage something like that. And when I mentioned, graphic is probably the wrong term, and shocking is probably actually more accurate. But I guess I'm trying to reel back in my mind documentaries that I've watched where you're experiencing death in the manner that you are there. And at first, it's kind of, we have no idea who this person is, and we probably won't ever know who this person is, which is even more tragic. But then you tie it back to the death of one of the family members, and they find him. Spoiler alert there, I guess. But it was so crushing, and I had a hard time myself. Right, you're thinking, okay, it is going to be the worst case scenario, but when you go to when you experience it through the film, and not that it's anything like experiencing in real life, it's just shocking. And I guess I say graphic because it's like you're experiencing someone's loss in a similar manner to how, I mean, by no means by the gravity, but in a similar manner to how they experience it. And I can't recall watching a documentary where I got that sense of grief so quickly, and it was tough. And you did, and it's hard to talk about this as like, oh, you did a tremendous filmmaking feat, and that's not what I'm trying to say. But I mean, you did a great job at respectfully walking someone through, I guess more so walking in the shoes of someone else that has to deal with this on a at least weekly basis.
Right.
I guess that really isn't a question, but more of a, what you're doing in this doc is it's hard to do, but it's necessary.
Right. And we did have a lot of those conversations about balancing the various emotional aspects of it. And I mean, I sometimes call it one part mystery and one part prayer,
That's great.
it is a kind of it is a little bit elegiac of a film, it's a little bit of a somber film. It is infused with grief, the grief of the families. But they were just so brave, to let their story. I mean, I can't say that I would be as brave as they were to
Right.
share that kind of story. So, I mean, I think the one thing they had in common, the families, is a part of the reason they decided to share their stories was it. I think they felt just a little bit empowered by being able to do that, because you really do feel powerless in this system. And these are two families who were really, they were acting. I mean, they were active. They had agency. I mean, they were going to Brooks. They were searching. They were calling. They were doing things. They were they were doing their own search. But yet the system is such, and as is shown in the film, that you really, it's frustrating and dysfunctional. And so I think that they felt that if their stories got out there, perhaps, they could maybe spare the next family some pain.
Yeah, that, to wrap up the conversation just here, but also, kind of make mention of another powerful moment that I found was when one of the families is in front of Eddie, and so they go through their massive binders of deceased people that they have description of, from clothing or whatever they're able to still have on these people, and he's going through page by page to find something. For me, I'm like, oh my goodness, we need to digitize all of these pictures. We got to have tags. Being a filmmaker, and understanding documentary work, you have tags and things, so you can quickly pull up the necessary information that you want. And I so badly was like, I just want to go over there and help build a data, system for them to just quickly put in, okay, he was red hoodie, black pants, white shoes, and quickly be able to, help people find, some form of closure, if that's what it is, or hope if there isn't anything there, so for those responses, like what I had in that moment, I'm sure lots of other, audience members are going to have similar things. They want to take action in some manner, or want to do something to contribute to the cause here. What can they do? How can they help?
Well, I mean, first of all, if somebody's really moved by the stories in the film, Eddie Canales is who runs the South Texas Human Rights Center, is, as far as I know, the only humanitarian aid that's based there in Brooks County, and he could always use support. So somebody can certainly support his efforts of putting water out, which I think is making a difference. The other thing people can do is they can just talk to their lawmakers, because that's really the only way things are going to change, is if people get an earful. Because, and really, I guess boiling it down, that is why Lisa and I wanted to make this film. We felt that if lawmakers could meet the families of the missing, they would feel differently about the policies they're creating. And so we hope that maybe the film could be a bit of a way to do that.
Yeah, I think it absolutely is. And I think you're honestly doing God's work. And again, I think one of the massive accomplishments and successes here is, and like you said before, you didn't set out to make a political film. You set out to make a humanitarian film. I think you did a really great job at just pulling back the labels and everything else, and just saying, hey, look, this is human life here that deserves opportunity just like the next person. So what are we doing? That's ultimately what the question's asking. I think you did absolutely fantastic job doing that. I have to imagine it's going to make quite a bit of difference the more it gets out there. So, congratulations to you on a fantastic, mission accomplished.
Thank you, Jonathan. I hope
Absolutely.
You're right.
Yeah. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. I hope you all watched the documentary if you haven't yet. And thank you for tuning into this special segment of the Greater Farmington Film Festival. Bye, everyone.